Welcome back to Demystify Biometrics, the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of digital identity, biometrics, and cutting edge technologies shaping our lives. I'm your host, Ashok Singhal, and today we are diving into a topic that is at the forefront of digital transformation: mobile driver's licenses, or MDLs. This season, we are shining a spotlight on the MDL ecosystem by speaking with key stakeholders who offer unique perspectives on different MDL use cases, security, privacy, and more. Today, I'm thrilled to have an esteemed guest with me, David Kelts. He is not a stranger to the world of MDLs. David brings a wealth of experience and expertise that has significantly shaped the development and adoption of mobile driver's licenses. I'm honored to have him here to share his unique perspectives and insights. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Let's start with a brief introduction. Could you please share your journey in the field of digital identity and your current focus on MDLs?
Yeah, definitely. So I started in digital identity. I was in physical ID documents for all the beginning part of this century, essentially, right? 2004 upward, about 2012 or so. Started working on like how do we turn these things into digital? That was within Morphotrust at the time, that became Idemia. And we started looking at how you could take the trust behind the driver's license and the proofing and move it into the online world. So like how you would use it for online login. That kind of spurred a bunch of topics and conversations and a little pilot with Iowa to try to render a driver's license on a phone. And from there, I joined maybe 10 years ago with the ISO working groups that started creating the mobile driver's license standards that have been published during the last couple of years. So that through that working group, we established basically what the interactions are with an MDL. And then I moved on and I was working with GT Group for about 4 years. We rolled out the Utah Mobile Driver's License Program, which was really sort of educational to learn about how people interact, how you could build an ecosystem, how difficult it is to build an ecosystem. And then I've been doing work for about the last year. I did a little bit with California for a short stint, and then I've been working trying on that ecosystem side, trying to build up relying parties who accept an MDL through my consulting work.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your background. So let's unpack today's topic and get started. To set the stage, everyone in the identity space is talking about MDLs in a way. And MDLs are touted as like game changers. What makes them unique for consumers, relying parties, and issuers? And why should each stakeholder consider adopting them?
All right, so the perspectives are different for each of these stakeholders, right? One is the consumer, right? Everybody's got, I got my ID card and a $10 bill for, on the back of my phone, and everybody has these, right? So that's the drive from the consumer point of view. I want the convenience of taking this last thing and moving it on. And in the US, that's the identity document is the driver's license or ID card. So that's really a driving force for them. One of the key things about MDL is that this carries the signature of the government. So the relying parties who accept it know that since it's digitally signed by the government, it's a government-proofed identity. It's our well-known identity document in this country. With that signature, it carries the same weight as the physical cards do. And you'll see as well, if you look at some of the online maps, they basically show states that have done the research and said, okay, great, we now know that the electronic version is equivalent to the physical version. And that sets the stage for relying parties to accept it. Now, if you look at from a relying party point of view, there's multiple reasons that they might start. That government signature is one, but also that they can somewhat change the interactions that they have with customers. You can do some things differently, more efficiently, quicker, or across different service platforms. Like you could do a web interaction and then followed by an in-person interaction with a mobile driver's license and know that person's the same person. I'll step back to the citizen side, right? Because one of the things that's a concern in a lot of different interactions is that the data from these, right, the data from the back of this is my full information. And whenever I share this or people take a photocopy of it, right, I'm sharing all that information. So the improvement in the electronic or digital formats, the mobile driver's license formats, is to have additional control over the data that you share. If I am entering a nightclub, really, what do they need to know? That I'm of the age to go in there, that I am the
Correct.
proper holder of that card. That's really all they need. And they don't need a record of it. And so having that additional control has consumer benefits. In my opinion, it also has relying party benefits, because now you don't have to do something with all that data. You don't have to store it, not store it. Like, there's no decision about it. You know, if you store it, there's implications of that. So I think the privacy improvements over the physical cards is another piece of that, in addition to the efficiency improvements. So that's kind of from each point of view. From the government's point of view, let's provide a service that benefits residents in our state. I think it is a bit more of that point of view. However, when you get to the online acceptance of mobile driver's license, they can see some fraud reduction and efficiency benefits.
Yeah, that's a great point, that we already see a lot of fraud with physical documents. And if, to your point about these documents being signed by government signatures, and then we can get rid of this easy to create fake documents, then that would certainly address a key industry problem that most of the relying parties and banks and everybody has been struggling with fraudsters easy to create these fraudulent documents.
Right. Exactly.
And certainly I can see from the consumer side also, like I have left my physical driver's license several times when actually needed it. So either I had to go back to my home or go to my car to get it. So clearly, if I have my phone, I can easily show my digital driver's license and can get the things done.
Yeah. Well, no, key thing in what you just said, show is not part of this, right? This is like tap, or this is share. This is tap to share, or like scan a QR code and share, and you have control of the information that you share, right? The concept of show is one of the biggest hurdles to adoption that we face, is people think, oh, I'm just going to kind of take the face of my phone and I'm going to show it to the officer. But in fact, the digital interaction here is part of the benefit of it.
No, that's a great point. As a consumer, I have control over what data I want to share with the other side, and I don't have to share every single detail on the driver's license.
Yep.
That's great. All right, let's keep moving. So we have seen different technology trends rise and fall. Do you think mDLs are here to stay, or do they risk fading away like some other innovations?
Well, okay, so right up front, at some point, everything fades away in technology, right? It's just a matter of the timeline, right? For these things, we find ways as humans to replace everything that we have. So, mobile and computing will change in a decade, and can't really predict where that will be. That's one thing. So, with that caveat, though, I think the value here, as this gets established, the value of control, the value of the convenience factor, the value of these digital interactions across both platforms, right? Like across web platforms and in-person presentation. I think that value will stay. And what we'll find is kind of similar to, I'll draw a little bit of an analogy in the banking space, where banks rolled out open IDs so that people had an open ID, and now you could use it across different banking platforms. What happened with that? Now all of a sudden fintech has just exploded. There's consolidators where I can see a full view of I can link my bank accounts together, and with identity assurance, I can transfer money between my different accounts. So those conveniences, and we kind of take them for granted, but the amount of time that saves consumers, the amount of control that gives them over their finances, that same thing is what we're about to have happen in the identity space too. Because now, if I have control over my identity, I have control over the data. I can use this across websites. I can use this across in-person purchases. there's going to be a whole new class of services that come out from this.
Yeah.
So I think we're just beginning to try to envision that class of services.
That's a really good point. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Moving on, a key element of MDL adoption is standardization. Could you share your perspectives on implementing MDLs using the ISO standard versus the W3C standard? What are the strengths and weaknesses of each standard?
Sure. And I get the question. The question is coming from, the last year or two where we've been talking about these. There's no versus here. This is not one versus the other. There are advantages in each one of them, and they should be deployed. And they are starting to come together. If you look at how the EU wallet architectures have come together, the point is the issuer should be able to give me a verifiable credential in a W3C format in my wallet application. They should be able to give me an mDoc in the ISO format and then I should be able to use those across channels. One of the things that the 18013.5 standard gives you that is starting also to be built on in the OpenID for verifiable presentation is that in-person presentation. Right, being able to click off this, start off this transaction with a QR code scan or an NFC tap, where the user has control over who they're sharing with, and they can be aware of who they're sharing with, and then consent to share the data. I think that in-person interaction is one thing you get, and has been in the ISO standard that maybe isn't in some of the other standards that have been built out. But as these come together, this should not make any difference. If an issuer decides that for their purposes or their reasons, I want to do a verifiable credential. I like that. I like the format. Maybe there's versions of that where I don't need selective disclosure. That person's always going to share the whole credential, which there's a lot of use cases for that. Then what I'll do is I'll use this data format and I will place it in a wallet. If I need selective disclosure, I might use an mDoc because it has the flexibility for that, or an SD-JOT. These things have been coming together, are coming together, and I don't see there's really need for them to be, and from a consumer point of view, they don't care in the slightest. There's it's like, can I get my driver's license in my wallet?
Yeah.
Application? Cool. Like, can I get my educational certificate in my wallet because I'm going to go present that? Can I prove that I'm employed by a certain person or by a certain company? If architectures are irrelevant at that point, right? And it's more, do I have control over this? Can I trust it? Is it private? It's the privacy behind it. Can I share parts of it when I want to share parts of it?
I think
those are the key considerations.
I think the takeaway that I'm having from what you said is it's not a zero-sum game between W3C standard versus ISO standard. It depends on the use case. The use case requires mDocs versus mDL ISO-based standard. Let's do that as long as we can get the job done and provide more control over the consumer data and enable the digital versions of the physical documents. That should be enabled.
Definitely a 1 + 1 = 2 scenario here, right? Where if I have both of these things, I'm going to be better off.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You touched upon, David, 18013-5 and -7. Could you demystify the differences between the two standards? And you mentioned online versus in-person use cases. Do you have an example that can help the audience grasp the practical implications?
Sure. I mean, they're companion standards, 18013-5 and -7, built on the same data model. The difference is in the interactions. So with 18013-5, that was published first. We're now 2-3 years into the publication of that. That was designed and published because it was ready for in-person transactions. So this is what I was referring to before. I can NFC tap and I can share data. I can scan a QR code. And it was really restricted down to these close proximity in-person transactions because that was ready first. And then 18013-7 adds a few additional interactions to that are intended to be for citizen to website interactions. Now that I have the credential on my phone, and I want to present it to a website. I want to fill out a form and apply for something or benefits of some kind. I can basically use my phone in an interaction we're starting to get used to on the web, scan the QR code, and I can push the data up to that website to apply for the service. And then I'll even add another to this, because I think the OpenID side of this, right, which is more what, and we're used to this now because I can use my login accounts across websites. This is another interaction that is really part of this sort of triad of things. If I can't, because with OpenID, I can do user authentication. I can prove to some level I am who I say I am. When you start to mix these things together, now you have the ability to log into websites that you know about. You could go and interact with a website you haven't visited before and push your data to it for form fill and for applying for something. And then you have these in-person, then you have the in-person transactions. So that's kind of where I feel those standards fit together.
I see. So it's basically in-person versus online, and the selective disclosure of information and using your driver's license for different use cases. So let's talk about adoption of mDLs now. I did a LinkedIn poll a few months ago, and one of the key concerns that I hear from majority of the participants were around adoption. So that adoption has been a slow climb. Why do you think consumers, relying parties, issuers have been hesitant to embrace mDLs? And what can be done to overcome these barriers?
I think there's a few reasons. One is, like, numerically, there aren't as there when you say adoption. At this point now, there's I can't remember, it's 14, 15 states that are issuing mobile driver's licenses. It covers about 46% of the US population. They could get one if they want to. The key thing is that they don't hear about it. In my day-to-day, not in my day-to-day interactions because I work in this area, but in most people's day-to-day interactions, they don't interact with their DMV. They don't really have an interaction with their state government. How are they going to find out that this exists? They would like it to, but they don't find out. So from a numeric standpoint of who has placed this on their phone, it's low. That then triggers, because you asked the question about relying party choices, that triggers the relying party saying, I guess there's not that many people who have it yet. I can wait. Now, that to me is incorrect. It probably a decision that you as a relying party are going to regret later, because you have this learning time ahead of you. So I think, adoption, the challenges in adoption are learning about it, knowing it, visualizing how these interactions are going to go, because I think that's another thing for relying parties. I can tell you that you can tap an NFC, but it's still tough to visualize, like, how's this going to work? Why can I trust it? How can I? So there's all these questions to be answered. And how do we overcome some of these challenges, right? So I think this is where it really makes sense for industry to band together with working with governments, working with the relying parties, and like pull to sort of create enough momentum, illustrate how relying parties, hey, this is how this interaction is going to work. These are the benefits to you. So they can picture it, they can see what the benefits are, and they can make decisions to start on. Because as you build the ecosystem, then you'll end up with what I call pull, right? Now I have places to use it. If I have a place to use it and I've never heard about mobile driver's license before, and I walk in and my state liquor store is accepting them, I'll be like, I can put my driver's license on my phone? Cool. Yeah. Right? And then I might do it right then and there, and to do it. So pull happens because there are places to use it, and that's the key part of it. So all these decisions by relying parties. In this, through Secure Technology Alliance, we have a resource online called mDL Connection, which is intended to be a repository of information for relying parties about mDL and reasons to adopt. And this is one of the slides we use to talk about the non-monetary reasons, right, to start to accept these now. And if you look at it, like I said in the beginning, this is government signed ID. If your use case requires a government identity document, right, then it's time to start looking at how these go, because there are multiple things. There are multiple stumbling blocks in a lot of these interactions right now with physical cards, including, something like the Know Your Customer that banks are doing. It's a stumbling block to take a picture of that card. It's hard. It's really hard for certain people to do that. It's hard to get a decent selfie of yourself and match to it. So being able to move some of these things from this analog world into the digital world, I think, is an advantage. And if you have issues with how you're accepting ID right now, or things that you can't, situations where you can't accept it now and you need government ID, this is, from a business side, one of the things we learned in Utah was that businesses will want to come off as like, hey, I'm partnering with my state government to improve privacy and to give other interactions to my customers. I'm tech forward. I'm doing this. So there's a whole marketing side to this that are reasons to do this now. If your company has a history of adopting new technology in order to make interactions easier and like make this streamline business interactions, this is a time to do that, because you will be distinct. You'll be out there at the forefront saying, we're doing something different in order to make our services better, and you can pull customers in with that. And the privacy aspect of this is pretty important. Like, okay, guess what? We're going to reduce the amount of data that we accept because we don't need it for our use cases. We don't need full information for you to enter our nightclub, so we're going to do like that. And that also has sort of a business value. And then you go on the tech side, it's better to do this now than to wait and be under the gun because you've got customers lined up and they're like, what do you mean I can't use my mobile driver's license to get in? What do you mean I can't use this to purchase? I can use it everywhere else. Like, once you're under that gun, you don't have the time to learn. So I think learning how these interactions go, rolling them out, piloting them, essentially, and moving it forward, holding events for your customers where they can use this. The pressure's lower now than it's going to be, and so it gives you that time to start to do it. So that's my long-winded version of benefits to the relying parties to do it. We're starting to see that through Secure Technology Alliance and mDLConnection.com. We're starting to see some of this momentum during the course of the last year. We've had quite a few. We've had banks, stores, banks in branch. It was really interesting to hear some of the ones that are starting to adopt it in branch. So you have this, the start really of this, and we're trying to pool that information together, put it up on mDLConnection.com, and make it available so that it's a resource for everybody to start to build these things.
That's great. So I would say if you are a relying party, there are a number of benefits for you. One, clearly being a differentiator in the industry. If, as David mentioned, like if you are an innovator and really want to set aside yourself from the competition by enabling, leveraging, embracing these technology, that's great. You don't have to store a lot of consumer data, a lot of customer data, as we are seeing more and more states and jurisdictions are coming up with strong privacy laws. So less data and more relevant data that you have, it's more better. And lastly, time to learn. I mean, this is the opportunity for you as a relying party business to use the time and learn about what works, what doesn't work, and figure out how do you want to tailor this experience for your customers. And if you are a customer or a person using mDLs, you have control over your data. You just don't want to share every single piece of information on your driver's license with businesses. You just share what is relevant for a specific use case you are interacting with.
Yeah, I've seen predictions where there's during the course of 2026. So here we are, we're right on the cusp of 2025, right? So a year from now, at some point during that year, there'll be like 100 million people who have a mobile driver's license in the United States. There's looking at the way adoption's happening now, the additional states coming in, because there should be a dozen more next year. Once you get to that point where there's 100 million, it's going to become an expected thing, and it'll become an expected interaction.
Awesome. Great point. All right, let's keep moving. Another concern, David, I've often heard and is being raised is fragmentation. With multiple MDL apps entering the market, are we creating silos, or is this going to increase burden on relying parties? What's your take on it?
Yeah, there's two facets to this. One is they seem to be all rolling out according to the same standards. And those standards, like as I mentioned before, kind of like starting to merge together and be interoperable within the different standards that are out there. So from that point of view, from an interactions point of view, there shouldn't theoretically be silos. Now, there could be scenarios where one wallet app supports 18.0.13.7 and the other one doesn't, and you end up with a little bit of fragmentation that way.
Hmm.
You could have them where one, especially where things historically have been, and it's changing, but where things have historically been with iOS, where you don't have access to the NFC interfaces, right? So you could roll out a reader that's NFC. That's changing as well, right? Apple's already said that they're opening that up so that we can start doing that. But there is some risk of fragmentation that I think will end up coming back together. And the fragmentation is likely to be on the features in the wallet apps and the interactions that wallet app supports in order to interact with things like a point of sale device or over the web or these other ones. But that hopefully will be like a shorter term fragmentation that gets resolved.
I see. I think your point is because these different iOS, Android, and Samsung MDL applications are based on standard, so they are interoperable across different relying parties. It's just that there could be in the short term some OS specific differences, but that should resolve going forward.
Yeah, OS specific differences, slight variations in the
The
standards,
standard.
implementing one and not another, like, oh, this is on our product roadmap. There could be those things, but that shouldn't stop adoption. And in fact, I would say adoption is going to resolve those things for us because it's going to create the demand.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Awesome. Let's keep going. Another concern I've heard is it's around binding of MDLs to the rightful owner. Is this a genuine challenge, or is this more of a misconception in your perspective?
I understand the challenge. It is definitely it's a genuine concern, and I understand the concern. Is it a challenge to do this? I don't think so. So let's break it down a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it's critical that these aren't like wallet passes where I can go in and like, oh, I'm going to the game with my buddy. I'm going to send him the ticket, right? And I can just send him the ticket. This isn't a bearer token in that way. And the onboarding process to get these, the DMVs are all doing, and across actually like national IDs and other parts of the world as well. They're all taking this onboarding process seriously and trying to meet certain standards for it. So you want to make sure either that happens in person as the person receives a physical card or is about to receive a physical card, then they can also get the mobile version, or using the physical card and doing biometric matching back to the system of record in order to provision that. There are standards for that. There's measurements for that, right? There's definitely different measurements. In NIST's 800-63 has like measurements for onboarding processes, enforced and made global a bit by sort of FIDO Alliance having onboarding standards. And then this has now, just within the last couple months, DHS in the US posted like, this is how, in order to be Real ID compliant, you need to meet these onboarding requirements. So this is the bar for how you get that to the right person. And that's happening also elsewhere around the world with in Australia and Europe is sort of like they're setting the bar for how you get this to the right person. So that will be present in every MDL. I won't be able to give my MDL to someone else now. And at the same time, let's say one of the scenarios I like to talk about is, do you give your kids access to play games on your phone, right? So now their Touch ID is there, and they can So could they open that up? Yes, but now the possibility of performing a biometric match at that time, like biometric match to unlock the device, unlock the phone, unlock the app, and the ability to express that to the relying party. I checked this person, or for the relying party to request a portrait and perform their own match, whether that's an in-person, a visual match or a biometric match. All of those meeting those standards, depending on the interaction that you have, but depending on the requirements you have, is possible with these. So then you should at every step along the way have the ability to trust that it was accurately given to the right person and it's being presented by the right person.
Got it. So basically, your point is like there are standards. Standards have already defined how to onboard, how to provision a driver's license, how a relying party can reliably make sure that it is actually the owner of the driver's license. So as long as the implementation can take care of, these standards and conform to these standards, this is more of like it's not a risk anymore.
And the fact that we've got, including in the US, I mean, you've got governments that are saying, like, you must meet these standards. This is important for you to meet these standards.
I see.
We don't want to replicate the fraud that we have with, in financial circles or with the physical cards. We don't want to replicate that. We want to make sure that that is done better. Collectively, make sure that's done better, and that the experience of doing that is sufficiently good enough for people, that it's not an imposition on them, that they can trust the system.
Perfect.
Systems, plural.
I see. Awesome. All right. So I think we are towards the end of our podcast. My last question to you is, as we look ahead, what are your predictions for mDL adoption in 2025? What key drivers and barriers should we watch for next year?
Yeah, I try I try not to do predictions myself. This is going to be a pivotal year for mDL. I think this is going to be a year where a lot happens. And the reason I say this is because being in the space, having visibility into what companies are doing, seeing some of these things, there's already acceptance being built out by large companies at scale. And we'll see that during 2025. Not to mention the fact that you've got, like I said, 14 states. I expect that'll double during the course of 2025, the number of states they're rolling that out. Some people tell me that's conservative. One of the things I could say in order to see this, so for the people that are listening to it, so in February, at the end of February, at the Identity and Payment Summit, I mentioned Secure Technology Alliance earlier, we're going to do an mDL technology showcase. So we're going to have real world, these are the interactions. This is actual, like whether it's production or close to production technology for different use cases, such as banking within a branch, where we know that some banks have rolled out this acceptance, liquor stores and purchase of alcohol at point of sale, over the web onboarding or app-based onboarding into banking scenarios. We've got casinos and gaming. So there are companies that have operationalized the acceptance of mDL, and while that hasn't been installed at scale in too many places, it's more installed as pilots or more locally. You're going to get a chance to see these at this mDL Tech Showcase. So I would encourage people to come and take a look at that. And then also, I think it's important that we use the content there and what we see there. And I can see that people can have these interactions. We will have mDLs issuers from California, Georgia, Virginia, New York, Iowa. They've all been taking part actively in sort of building out this ecosystem, and others, Utah. I don't want to leave any of them out, in order to take part in this as well. And you'll get to use real mDL if you're a California resident, right? The event is in San Diego. You could provision there and go through the showcase and try it safely, because no data will be stored. But you get a chance to see what these interactions are like, right? And so, yeah, putting that out there, that I think in February, that's going to be a big stepping stone for the build out of the ecosystem at the Identity and Payment Showcase.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Seems like a
You
great
bet.
initiative. where all the key industry stakeholders will be there, will demonstrate the MDL use cases, and to your point earlier, like relying parties can visualize how this interaction can look like,
Exactly.
and people can also see like how they can selectively share different information without their data, without sharing their data. Instead, like everything is in that secure environment, and
Correct.
so can you again remind when is this conference and where is it?
Sure. Identity and Payments Summit is one of the Secure Technology Alliance. It's an annual conference we have. It's February 24th is the showcase, 25th and 26th is the conference. It is in San Diego. Online, you can find it at stasummit.com. We invite people to come and attend and take a look at it, but also and bring your MDL if you'd like, and take part in it. But also, if there's others in the industry where like I've been building out my acceptance, and you can come and take part in the showcase and show what you've built. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing with the audience, with us. I appreciate it. All right. This has been an incredible conversation. We have explored the evolution of MDL, the unique features of MDLs, challenges to adoption, and even predictions for the future. Before we wrap up, is there one key takeaway you would like our audience to remember about MDLs, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the beginning. This is the opportunity to start to take interactions that we do in the physical world, analog interactions, and start to move them digital. This is the starting point of this. And if it's happened in banking and finance, this is now also going to happen with identity documents and other credentials as it builds out birth certificates, education certificates, professional licenses. So this is the start of that. And therefore, the time's now really to start to accept digital credentials in addition to the ones that we have in the physical world.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Demystify Biometrics. If you enjoyed the discussion, please subscribe and review the podcast. And don't forget to visit our blog at www.demystifybiometrics.com for more insights into the world of digital identity. David, thank you again for sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure. Until next time,
It's been fun.
Stay curious and keep exploring the future of identity. Thank you, everyone.